friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card with the Hello Bluebird Fall Cleanup Crew stamp set. So I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And I'm going to be coloring to match some pattern paper from the Simple Stories Acorn Lane 6x8 pad. So I'll tear out the sheet I want to use as my color palette inspiration and tuck that under my cardstock panel. I am coloring with my Copic markers, and I am starting with my bunny, and I'm first going to do a base layer of E50 and E51. I want to add some details to this bunny in just a little bit, but I want to have just an overall undercoat of the lighter shades, and I also use those for the white parts of my fox. So I laid that in with the E51 on both of them first, and now I'm coming in with that E50 to blend that out and just soften it into the white cardstock, which is going to serve as my highlight. So for the fox, it's going to be the lower part of the face, the inner ear, and the tip of his tail. And then I also added some of those two shades into the cut part of my tree stump. I'm going to stay within the E50 family, but I am going to darken it up by bringing in E53, E55, and E57. And this is when I'm going to start adding some details to my bunny. And I have no plan when I start doing this. I just kind of go with the flow and see what happens. Just have a little bit of a play with my markers. And so I'm just placing that E57 wherever I think it should go, adding little patches and spots, and then I'll start blending the edges of that out with the E55. And I decided to give him almost like a little dark cap on the back of his head with his fur. And so I'm just bringing that color in a little bit closer. I still want to keep his face nice and light though, and then I'll blend out the edges of the other spots, and decided he needed another one on his leg there. And then I will blend out the edges of that even further with the E53, just going right around the edge of the E55, kind of overlapping it a little bit so that I can smooth out the blend and make it as seamless as possible. Then I'm going to go back to my E51 to transition into the white on the face, since I did end up covering up the initial layer that I did on his face. So I just added that in with the E51 and then also brought in the E50 to just soften that into the white cardstock once again, and created like a little heart shape around his face, which is something that I really love to do on bunnies. And then I am going to move over to my tree stump, and I will use the darkest three shades there for that. So I'm using the E57 on the edges, but then also doing some of the little swirls to indicate the texture in the wood grain, and just making those look a little bit deeper and more recessed, and then blending out with the E55. And then I left a few little areas there for that E53 as well, so we get some nice dimension on that stump. Then I'm going back to my bunny now that he has dried, and just adding in a little bit of dot detail into the larger patches to create kind of like a really soft and cozy texture. Then I'll move on to my fox, and I'm going to use YR12, YR14, and YR18 to pull in those rust tones in that pattern paper. So I'm using the YR18 first to lay in some shadows around the back of his face, on the inner edges of his ears, the backs of his arms and legs, and also the base of his tail where it is connected to the body, so it would not be getting as much light. And then I will blend that out with the YR14, just continuing on his little feet. I'm leaving some white space on his paws because I'm going to color over that with a different shade in a little bit. But for the rest of his orange areas, I'm going to fill in with the YR12. So just bringing that color down on his paws a little bit further, and then filling in the rest of his tail. And then I am going to switch out the YR18 for the YR16, and I'll do my pumpkin. I wanted it to be just slightly different in tone from the fox, so the YR16 is going to become my darkest shade now, and then I'll blend that out with the YR14, and I'll use the YR12 for my highlight. And then while I have these shades out, I'm also going to hop around and color a whole bunch of the leaves in these different leaf piles. I want to have all of the colors in that pattern paper represented in the leaf piles and the different falling leaves. So I'm just going to pick and choose some here and there to do with this combo. And so while I'm doing that, I just want to chat about this stamp set. This is part of the new Hello Bluebird kit release for September. And this stamp set is part of the classic kit, which includes this stamp set and its coordinating dies, and then an additional die set. And then there's also the expanded kit, which contains a lot more product. And then we also have a special Halloween kit this month. So all of those are going to be available on September 16th at 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time if you're in my time zone. So definitely check those out on the Hello Bluebird web shop, and I will have the link down in the description below, so you can easily check that out if you're interested. I did decide that I wanted some of these leaves to be a little bit darker, so I did add the YR18 back in, and then I'm going to do some additional leaves as well because I forgot to do the ones that are in the fox's wheelbarrow. So I just added those in, and then I'm going to give these critters some rosy cheeks. I'll do that with R11, R20, and R22, starting with the R22, which I also filled in the bunny's nose with, then blending out with the R20, adding some of that to the inner ear, and then blending out with the R11. And I did forget to do the inner ear of my fox while I had those pinks out, but I'll go back and do that later on. For now, I wanted to give him some little kind of black brownish feet, little stockings on his paws. So I brought in E43, E44, and E47 for that. And I'm just blending that into the orange. And I really like how that turned out. It was just a little bit of a different look. And then I am also going to do my acorn shells with this combo, or the acorn caps. And so I started with the R47, blended out with the R44, filled in with the R43, and I did two of them in one direction and the other one in the other, just so I could have them kind of turned in different ways on the card. I'll also do the stem of my pumpkin with this combo. Since we don't have any green in that pattern paper, I went with brown instead. And then I'm also going to do some brown leaves in my piles. So I'm just kind of hopping around and choosing which ones I want to do with this dark brown combo. One thing that I really love about choosing a pattern paper print to base my color palette off of is that it really makes you think outside of the box with certain things. Like coloring in the pumpkinstead brown instead of green, which isn't so unusual, but it's probably something that I might not have done if the color palette didn't kind of force me into it. And the same thing with like the wheel on the wheelbarrow. Like I didn't want to bring in black because there was no black in that pattern paper. So I'm actually going to end up coloring it with this combo here and doing it in a dark brown. And it just creates like a different look. It's something a little bit unexpected. It's not so far off that it looks odd, but it just adds a little bit of extra interest because it's not what the viewer has come to expect. So for that wheel, I'm just placing the darkest color underneath and then adding the highlight up in front where the light would hit it the most. And then I'm going to go slightly lighter with E41, E42, and E43. And I will continue to color in some of these leaves, filling in some of these larger leaves that I started with the darker browns, and then also coloring additional leaves in the piles. There's not a ton of colors in that pattern paper to work with, but there was enough that I did feel like it could make a really interesting and striking color palette for this particular card. And I did want to mention that the acorns are actually not from this stamp set. They are from a different stamp set from the expanded kit that is called Nuts for Fall, that features some adorable little squirrels. But since there were acorns in that pattern paper, I wanted to have them in this scene to match. And so I just took that one image from that other stamp set. Everything else that I've stamped out is from the Fall Cleanup Crew. So we've got two different golden tones in that pattern paper. One is a little bit more muted, and then one is a little bit more bright. And so I am doing the more muted of the two now, using YR20, YR21, and YR23. And again, I'm just hopping around and doing a few of the leaves, trying to spread those colors throughout the scene. So I'm trying not to do any two leaves that are right next to each other with the same combo, but just trying to spread them out and, make sure that there's something different in between. And then I'm going to switch to the brighter of the two golden tones. And for that, I'm going to use Y11, Y21, and Y26. So when I start out, it doesn't look brighter because the Y26 and the Y21 are kind of like a deeper, duller, more desaturated golden tone. But when I throw in the Y11 into that mix, it really brightens this up and warms up this combo. But the darker, more desaturated tones just add a little bit of depth to it and don't take it too much into like the orangey yellow tone. So that's why I like it. And so I'm just gonna continue adding in more leaves. And then I am also going to do the buttons on my fox's overalls. And since they are so super tiny, I'm only going to use two shades. I'm just going to use the Y26 and blend out with the Y11. And then I will do my bunny's scarf, and for that I am going to use all three shades. So the Y26 in the creases and where it wraps behind, and then blend out with the Y21, and then use the Y11. And then I'm going to go back to the E40 and E41 for the bunny's tail, and also I'm going to do a base layer on the fox's shirt. I decided that I was going to do a plaid for him, and so I just wanted to have this kind of creamy tan undertone. And then I'll bring in the E43 and E44 back for that plaid pattern. I'm going to do a wider stripe with the lighter of the two shades, which is the E43. And I'm just following the way that the sleeve is drawn and then the top of the shirt so that I know what direction to go in. And then I'm adding thin stripes of the darker of the two shades, the E44, to create that plaid pattern. And I also added that to his sleeve, so everything matches. And then for his overalls, I am going to bring in B91, B93, B95, and B97. And I'm going to start with the B97. Sometimes for jeans, I also use the B99, but I was trying to match the blue tone that is in that pattern paper, and the B99 would have been a little bit dark for it, so I decided to skip the darkest shade and just use the other four. So B97 for my shadows, blended out with the B95. And then I will fill in the rest with the B93, But for his cuffs, which would be the inside of the fabric, which are usually a little bit lighter for jeans, I am going to start with the B95, blend out with the B93, and use the B91 for the highlight. Then I decided to do the bunny's sweater in the same tone so that we can have them have a little bit of a matching outfit going on there. And so I am using the B97 again for those shadows, blending out with the B95, and then using the B93 for the highlight. So I skipped the B91 on the bunny, and then I also did the bottom hem to match. And then I am going to let that dry, and I'll come back and do a little bit of detail. But for now, I am going to color in my leaves. And for those, I'm going to skip the B97 and just start with the B95. So yes, I am going to have some blue leaves, which is a little bit unusual. But again, that's what I was talking about, where when you go with a color palette that is chosen by your pattern paper, it kind of forces you to make some interesting choices. And I actually really love the blue leaves in the mix. I think it's something really different and unique. And, you know, I just like it. I think it adds a really nice pop to those piles of leaves. So I'm coming back in now with that B97 and just doing a quick little polka dot print on the bunny's sweater to give that a bit of interest and texture. And then I decided that I would do a second layer on the sleeves and the hem of the sweater to make them just a little bit darker so they match the polka dots. So I have now used all of the colors in that pattern paper. So I'm going to have to go back to some of the previous shades to finish, and I decided to go back to that rich bold orange that I used on the fox for the leaf that the bunny is holding, and then I just went back to the E40s for the wheelbarrow. So I used E42 and filled in the edges and the framework below the wheelbarrow, and then I added my shading in with that, and then I'm blending that out with the E41, and then I'm going to fill in with the E40, and that is going to finish up the coloring. So I will trim these images out with their matching dies. For the background, I've cut down a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock with the Nesting Decal A2 dies, which are one of the essential dies that are always available on the Hello Bluebird web shop. And I am going to blend on some Distress Oxide inks. I'm starting with Speckled Egg, which is a very, very light desaturated blue. I want to keep the background fairly light, so that's why I decided to start with this one. And I am using very light pressure as I add this color because I don't want to get too heavy-handed with it. I really want my images to stand out against that background. Also, I'm using a brand new foam because the last one I was using got a little bit torn up on one side. So it takes a little bit for that ink to saturate the foam and for you to get a good blend. So now you can see it's starting to get a little bit easier on there. And I'm just going to continue adding that color until I'm happy with how it's looking. And then I had to make a decision for the ground, and once again I didn't want to bring in green because there was no green in that pattern paper, so I decided to use Scattered Straw instead, which is a kind of mellow yellow kind of shade. It's very, very soft and it has a lot of like a fall tone to it, I think, and so I thought it would look almost like dried grasses. So I'm just blending the area between the two a little bit better, and then I am going to bring in just a little bit of Stormy Sky to the center of the Speckled Egg because that is more in the tone of the blue that is in that pattern paper. So just a little bit of that, and then blending back out with the Speckled Egg. Then I wanted to do some splatter detail on this, so I squirted a bit of water onto an acrylic block and mixed that up with a thin paintbrush, or picked it up with a thin paintbrush, And it turned out that the paintbrush still had some metallic gold paint on it. And I just decided to go with it. Why not? Metallic gold always looks great for fall. So I decided to add that in. I did dab it up with a paper towel, but some of the metallic gold did stay behind, which was totally fine. Then I wanted to do some splatter with both of these inks. So I'm going to start with the scattered straw, mix that up with a little bit of water, and splatter that all over the ground. Although I don't mind if some of it gets into the blue. I like the mix of the two shades together. Then I'm just wiping off my block so I can add some of the stormy sky there as well. And I'll add that to the top portion of the card. And I want to make sure that some of that splatter gets around the white edges that I left. And then I did also add a little bit of that to the lower edges as well, just to have a little bit of combination. And then my final step is that I'm going to add a little bit of white acrylic paint in there. I'm using Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White and mixing that up with a bit of water. And that's just going to add a little bit of brightness into my background. So I just added a little bit of that as well. And once I'm happy with how this is looking, I am going to set this panel aside to dry completely. And in the meantime, I am going to go back to my pattern paper. So I have the sheet that I used for my color inspiration, and I want to find another print to match. So I pulled out this kind of gold gingham print. And then I thought about using a third print, and I ended up deciding that I was just going to go with those two. I just really liked the look of those together. So I am going to grab my die, which is going to be the Happy Fall die. This is part of the expanded kit from the September release from Hello Bluebird. And I'm going to trim that out of some Lawn Fawn chocolate bar cardstock and some of that gingham pattern paper, the gold gingham. And I am going to decide which way I want this to go, if I want the brown on top or if I wanted the gingham on top. And I decided to have the gingham on top because I thought it just made the sentiment a little bit brighter, but I like having that darker brown drop shadow behind it, so that's why I decided to layer the two. And so I'm just grabbing my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue and adding a thin bead of that all along the back of each of those letters so that everything will be glued down securely. I'm using my EK Success reverse tweezers to help me get that placed just how I want it. And I'm shifting that a little bit to the right and down so I do get that drop shadow on the upper left. And then there is the AL in the word fall that die cut separately, so I will just repeat this process for those letters, making sure that I have the same amount of drop shadow showing. And then I will set this aside, and I'm going to stamp on the inside of my card. I'm using another piece of chocolate bar cardstock that I scored and folded to an A2 standard size card, so 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. And I am stamping on the inside in Lawn Fawn walnut ink, and I'm taking another couple of the images and a sentiment that says, "May the warmth of the season bring you endless joy," which I thought was really sweet. I stamped that down 3 times to make sure it was nice and bold because that will dry back a little bit. And then I've trimmed down the pattern papers so the floral print here is going to fit the entire front of the card. And then the gold print is 2 1/4 by 4 1/4. And I'm going to put that up toward the top of the card. So it's actually going to fall right behind where that sentiment is going. And then I'm going to pop up the focal panel with some foam tape. So I just line that up in the center. And then you can see I'm making sure that that sentiment falls right where that gingham print is on the card. And so it almost looks like I've cut these letters out of the gingham print that is behind, and it just kind of repeats and ties that print in, which I thought was kind of a fun look, something different for me. So I've added the main part of that sentiment first, and now I will add the AL to complete it. Very easy to line up inside. And then I can bring in my images. And I'm going to start by figuring out the placement of my largest images, which is going to be the fox and then the stump and the bunny, because I wanted the bunny to be standing on it. And I want to make sure that I'm not covering up too much of that sentiment. It still needs to be legible. So I'm going to add my fox so that just his ears are touching the bottoms of the L's. And then I'll add that stump down on the right hand side, tuck that under the bunny's feet, and then I'll glue the bunny down over top so that just her head is covering the bottom of the F, but you can still see that it is an F, and the same with the A. So once I have that, I'm going to start filling in this scene, adding in the piles of leaves. I want this to look like a really full, fun fall scene. So there's going to be lots of leaves spread throughout. I'll tuck the other large leaf pile back behind the stump and the bunny. And then I want that pumpkin down on the lower left side to balance out the fox on the right. And then I'll add another pile of leaves, the smaller pile. So I stamped out the larger pile twice and the smaller pile twice, and then each of the leaves twice, so that I would be sure to have enough to really fill in this scene. So I'm just figuring out the placement of this second smaller pile of leaves, and once I know where that should go, I'll add a little bit of liquid glue and just tuck it back behind that wheelbarrow so it looks like he's kind of coming through the piles and creating a path. And then I'll add some of these little acorns down toward the bottom of the scene, kind of tucked into the leaves or on the edge of the leaves. And I'm going to have one on the left since we already have the pumpkin, which is quite large, and then I'll have two on the right hand side, kind of overlapping a little bit. And then all that's left are these falling leaves, and I want to really fill in the area around the sentiment with these. So I'm just adding them here and there, again, trying to spread that color around. So I used the blue leaf up toward the top because that's kind of the farthest away from the blue sweater and the blue overalls, and then just the same with the other colors. I want to have little pops of those vibrant tones kind of spread throughout the scene, and it's really just going to brighten up that background. So like I'll place one yellow leaf up toward the top and then another one down toward the lower left, just trying to spread that color around. Like I said, I've got one orange little leaf up towards the top, so I put another one down by the acorns. And then I have a couple of these smaller leaves that I'm going to add between the letters of the sentiment to really make it look like those leaves are being caught in the air and tossed all around by the breeze. So I was left with one brown leaf that was a little bit large, and I could not find a place to put it, so that one is going to stay off this card. I decided to just leave it off. I didn't want to overdo, but I did want to add a little bit of glitter, so I'm taking some Stardust Stickles and just adding that to each of those fall leaves. And for the leaves in the piles, I'm just going to kind of dot it throughout, just so you get little flashes of it here and there, but it doesn't completely overwhelm the coloring. I still want that to stand out. So once I have it on all of those leaves, I am going to lift this card up so you can see all of the detail, catch all of the sparkle and shine, and give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I really love how this turned out. I think the color palette was super fun for fall. If you enjoyed it too, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. All of the products will be listed and linked in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.